Hello and Happy New Year, everyone.
Hello, hello. Happy New Year as well. Hi, Jan.
How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks.
Happy New Year's. Good afternoon.
Hey, hey. How are you, Andrew?
I'm doing pretty well, thanks. Hope that you both had good holidays.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's go. There we go. Yeah, back to the grindstone.
Seems to heat up pretty quickly.
Yep.
So first week of the year, and we already got a breach reported publicly. Is that the case?
Where's that?
With Circle CI?
Oh, I didn't even know
Yeah,
that.
I saw that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hey, Dan.
Hi.
As per usual, if people could go in there and update themselves on the trusty doc, appreciate it.
Are we, is
Will
there a
do.
new doc or are we?
Yeah, just keep the same doc, I guess, because then we can have some sort of follow-up
Yeah.
from the previous meetings, I guess. Hey, Brian.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
I gotta,
See people coming in now. So, yep. If
up my
people...
Lego game.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's Lego.
Hey,
How many
familiar?
days? Oh, right. There you go.
That was my COVID project. I happened to get it for Black Friday, and then when I was quarantined, I was like, well, I guess I'll do this.
How many days does it take to do that?
Wow.
Like
This is
one,
a tough
you
one.
literally have nothing else to do.
I think certain members of this household would kill me if I got that Saturn V though.
Hey, Crow, no tin hat in the beginning, in the new year?
Oh, any minute, any minute. That's why it's ducked to the right. Oh,
Oh, no,
oh.
no.
All about the Lego today. What's the biggest Lego wins?
Good morning.
And everyone, so if people can jump into the notes and update themselves, that'd be great. Let me just forward it to everyone. And we have a hat. Normality has been restored. Oh, very nice. Oh, nice one from Alan. That's good. All right. So the agenda is fairly light today as we're just starting out, but I think it's good to pick up from a lot of the things that we were talking about last year, because I want to make some I think we can make some expedited progress now. It's been a lot of getting things set up. All right, so anyone, any offers on a scribe? Phenomenal, Dan, as always. Appreciate that. Very cool. Any new people joining this week? No. So let's move right on. So the main update for me on the agenda there is the update in the proposals. We have two, as we may recall from last time. I'd had a conversation with a number of people at the TAC to ensure that we could formally propose them. We are on the agenda for the 10th, which is the next TAC, which is next week, Wednesday, I think. So we should be good to go on the TAC. I'll join and represent and go through the proposals. I think we've gone through them enough times. I think they're in good shape. Certainly socialized it enough. Would welcome other support if people would like to join the TAC and also contribute. That would be fantastic. But I think that's kind of the pivot point where hopefully we get some traction there, and then we can go off and implement those proposals we've put together as a group. So looking forward to that. Any feedback on that? Anyone want to come? Think we need to add additional things?
I'll be on the road, but I'll try and attend if I have connectivity. Definitely.
Great. Next one was an action that I think I took. Unfortunately, I think with the end of the year, wasn't sure if someone else was taking it as well or differently, but either way, it hasn't been set up. So I'll take the blame for that. But we were going to set up a call with different groups to discuss the repository of threats that we'd been discussing. I'd raised it, I think, 2 meetings ago, and the idea, just to refresh people's memories, was basically a repository where we collate threats that have been supply chain attacks that have been identified, collate any material we can, whether that's source code, binaries, metadata, and such, and then provide that as a way of analyzing what we're experiencing in the industry. We can then feed that into validating our taxonomy and our threat models, and also do some additional analysis as well. It turned out multiple different groups had already thought about that already. I think prime one being the securing repository group, if I'm correct. Yep. And I think, Jacques, you'd also talked to a couple of other people there and elsewhere who were interested in this group. Yep.
This idea, at least, yeah.
Yep. So look, is anyone aware of a sort of formal meeting happening to discuss this that we've missed the boat on, or should we? Is this still valid, and we should get in touch with people?
I'm not aware of a specific purpose meeting for it. At the last securing software repos call, we talked about it again. I sort of brought back that end users is thinking about it, as well as I think identifying security threats. Are thinking about it in a different form. And I think Zach Newman suggested, we had some academics on the call, I think from North Carolina, and he sort of, hint said this would be like setting the infrastructure up would be a great project for a grad student, because, then they get the credit for creating the data set and they can be very citable. So good way to get some cheap labor.
That sounds all good for that.
Yeah.
So, could you just ping those at that other group that you mentioned there, Jacques? I missed it. Yeah. So there's the secure repos, there's us, and there's identifying
security. Yeah, identifying security threats, if I remember correctly. They have one called simulation. I'll type it in because it's weirdly spelled.
So that's. Cool. All right. So action on John to really do it this time and set up a meeting. I think I'll go for next week or the week after to get people together, because I think we've talked about this a couple of different ways. I really do think there's some benefit in doing that. All right, I will do that. Next point we had was the suggested deliverables from the last meeting. I just want to validate those just so we kind of set ourselves up maybe for this group. And I think we should have an open conversation about what other deliverables we think we should progress with if there's ones that we didn't think through last year, right? But the ones that I believe I noted down was finish the architectures work. And this refers to the work was really our proposal, which was to set aside multiple architectures for not really small, medium, and large, but multiple architecture, maybe one regulatory end user, one end user that doesn't actually create software, define an architecture for what that looks like, threat model that architecture, and then align that to our taxonomy. So we need to continue with that work. And I think at the moment, I think it's fair to say, Henrik, you've been leading that and doing a grand job putting a lot of that architecture together. So as a group, we can rally around that. And I think that's probably going to accelerate when we get this proposal sorted. Henrik, you yep.
Yeah, just to say that I didn't make any progress in the last months, also due to vacation. But yeah, I will be happily continuing this work and would welcome anybody joining this. Of course.
Absolutely, same. Right, so that's that one. I think that as the proposal gets agreed, we can really put a foot down on that one. The other one was an idea around a space for others to share experiences, experiences and how they're securing their supply chain, leveraging SBOMs, or how thinking about this problem. I think Shaq, you proposed that one. If I just recalling it.
Possibly. I'm just waiting for the fog of the holiday to clear and tell me whether or not I did that. Yes. Oh, yes. Now I remember. It was by analogy to the CNCF end user working group, where one thing they do very regularly is folks will share their experiences of using CNCF technology. So people will come in and do a talk about Prometheus and how they use it, you know, right, or their experiences with this and that. So that would be a useful forum for end users to come in and say, we tried using salsa provenance attestations and we had these obstacles, and people can ask questions or say, oh, it worked really well. I see that it's easier than I thought and we should try it.
Maybe we can reach out to a couple of industries or enterprises that we know are focusing on this and seeing if they'll give a presentation back to this group. Mm-hmm. I know a couple. Dan, you got a hand up. You know further ideas?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I know at least one other group is doing office hours, public events. They're taking advantage of Linux Foundation staff who are setting those up for them. And, you know, would it make sense to do something similar where, you know, as a stream effectively, you know, where somebody can come in and talk about their, are we interested in that level of sharing, or are we more interested in the sharing from enterprises to this group, or what? Yeah.
Which direction is that what you're looking for, Dan? Are we telling them
and
how
also
they
to what level of public are, you know, like I always try and err towards things being more public, but I know in some cases there could be sensitivity where some enterprises may not feel, some people in enterprises may not feel empowered or may not be empowered to speak publicly, whereas they may be empowered to speak on a you know, to a smaller group. Yeah.
I don't know why we couldn't do both, actually. One where an enterprise talks under Chatham House rules, and then another where maybe somebody like Checkmarks, which is doing some interesting stuff in this space, gives more of a public presentation.
Yep, it's got my vote, Andrew. One thing I was thinking was Checkmarks, you're right. I think they're doing some great innovation, but also getting industry, literally an end user to come and present and say, look, this is what we've done to supplier. This is how we're using SBOMs. And see if we can collect some data on that. I like the idea of the office hours. I guess it's if we get the best practices and we understand how we as a group would recommend people address supply chain issues as we mature, I guess we could certainly provide some more of that data. Even as it stands, I think certainly we've got a lot of experts on this group that could provide some feedback to those individuals as it stands, right? Can I ask how people got participation in that sort of office hours in the other group? Does anyone know? Obviously, the people that are actually going to help give the guidance, that's from the group, but is that something that was advertised and people just randomly came to office hours?
I could take an action to go talk to Marta. I think she's heading up some of the efforts. It's not whatever the group is that Alpha and Omega is in, it's part of that working group, but I can talk with her and see, because she was kind of helping coordinate that and see what the experience has been so far.
That'd be cool, because I think we also mentioned outreach. Part of the work we wanted to do was outreach, and I think this nicely fits into that, right? All right, very cool. Just flipping the order around a little bit, the other piece of outreach I think we had discussed was feedback loop with auditors. I think the word auditor was used last time.
That was me, because I'd heard an anecdote that auditors were already starting to ask about questions about SBOMs, and so yeah, like it would be good if we talk to auditors rather than the feedback loop with auditors being, it takes a while for the auditors to pick up on the stuff, and then they show up and it turns out we had a very different idea of how the technologies were meant to be applied.
Right. Yep, I think so. Again, more outreach. Does anyone have any connections with the auditor community or the communities you were thinking about, Shaq?
I have none. I am a lowly engineer. I have no auditor contact.
So
Okay.
by auditors, are we including commercial third-party certifications? Because those folks are always happy to find new things to be told everyone else has to certify. But I'm not sure we want them until we know exactly what we're looking for.
It was more, so my concern was that, like, the anecdote, and it's been a little while since I heard it, so I'm fuzzy, but the anecdote was that some auditors had already started showing up at places and saying, well, where are your SBOMs? And this sort of suggests that, it suggests that, like, the possibility that the things that we're concerned about and the technologies we want to promote, we want to make sure that we have a common understanding with the folks who will be relied on to set the standard. We don't want them to sort of fly off in a direction where it's very onerous but not effective, right? Like we've all seen that.
As the guy who's busy working with the FAR team, very much on the same team, like, oh gosh,
Yeah.
it's go wrong very quickly. Thank you.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Dan, you were next.
Yeah, just to say, I have heard this in the context of PCI compliance, where some company that is doing the PCI, like working to establish whether or not somebody is PCI compliant, sends them a bunch of questionnaire or, questions, and one of them being, having to do with SBOMs, right? And so that raised a red flag to me, because not necessarily a red flag, maybe it is the right thing, I don't know, but it struck me that the question that came to mind was, obviously, is this being asked out of a knowledge of what's going on with SBOMs in the industry, or is it being asked because there was an executive order about it, because SBOMs are hot, right? Basically, so I do think this is important.
Got it. Jason, can you go on mute? I think you're there's quite a lot of background noise coming from you. Thank you. Are we all right leaving that as a placeholder for now, or does someone want to take the lead and trying to address that one? It seems to me we've got leads for the others at the moment. We haven't really got anyone to go after that one, which I think could be fine. Maybe let's leave it on the list for now and come back. We also had an end user guide for SBOMs creation and usage. Alan, with you on the call, is there an end user sort of SBOM guide in the works from one of the groups that you're working with, or do you need assistance?
Great question. So I don't know if anyone on the call is familiar with the Enduring Security Framework, ESF. This is an NSA-driven public-private partnership that has done some work on SBOM from a downstream consumer perspective, but it's very high level and really focuses on the things that NSA corporate partners spend their time thinking about. I'll paste the link in the chat because while I nominally signed off on it for my agency, it's not great. The high-level challenge around SBOM consumption discussions is today, no one has piles of SBOM sitting around for their organization, with a few exceptions. And so we don't really have lots and lots of tools or indeed standard operating procedures. So I think anyone who wants to start that and say, here's a broad space, we're going to focus on this chunk, would be very, very helpful. I can sort of loop you in on different pieces. So I put further down on the agenda if we have time to talk about it. If you are a consumer of a cloud application, what do you want from your service provider? And right, the difference between saying I need the SBOM versus I need you to attest to me that you have an SBOM, things like that. So all of that is to say we don't have anything immediate, but we should be. It is tricky if we set out a very ambitious plan, because it is my firm hope that in 18 months, SBOMs will be integrated into standard vuln management software. Today it isn't. And so what kind of guidance do we want to write if we're hoping that the world looks different and there are new tools? So that's, I'll pause there.
Grob, you got your hand raised?
Has anyone talked to Bressers and Kate over in the SBOMs Everywhere SIG? They might have some information or be interested in collaborating.
I'll check the notes and see what they've been I've been trying to attend that as much as possible, but I don't think they're directly relevant to what do we do with SBOMs.
I know that I helped them stage a diagram of like SBOM, the universe of SBOM tools that they were going to kind of go through. So this may be a use case they're interested in working on, or have something possibly, and who knows.
It's worth chasing up, I guess, right?
Yeah.
I think maybe anecdotally within the group, we can probably start to collate experience on what people are doing with SBOMs and how they're leveraging it for vulnerability management, or what are the other use cases. I mean, it kind of seems to me is that that's the tool, and some of the usages we're getting out of that capability. We also have the major problem for a supply chain, and that's how we're looking at the threat model, the different attacks, the taxonomy, and then you can connect, well, this is what's going on, this is what we're getting attacked with, and this particular area is where that we're using SBOMs to mitigate some of those controls, and maybe it gets connected to that way. But I think, yeah, as part of documentation and evidence, that's something I'm sure we can look at. Any other major pieces of work we think as a group, any deliverables for the next short time? I've added one in the chat, but I don't want to take all the air. All right, in the absence of anything else, I will take all the air then. I'll start to, please chip in. But one of the things that I wanted to do was really raise the awareness from an end user perspective on the increasing supply chain threat and the increasing amount of malicious packages and software that we're seeing out there now, and raising awareness that as end users we can and should do something about it now. We're talking about how we can secure our CI/CD pipelines, which is fantastic. We're talking about how we can distribute SBOMs and understand the components within other vendor software, which is fantastic, and how we do vulnerability management, which is also fantastic. But we're getting hammered with malicious software now, or it's really starting to step up. And I don't see many people looking at literally looking at ingestion and preventing it from getting into different enterprises. Anyone seen that? I mean, that's something that I've got a bit of a bug in my ear on that I'm going to focus on, or I'd like to suggest we focus on. But anyone seeing that? Any feedback on that?
What do you mean by looking at? I mean, because this is kind of like one of the areas that Sneak has, like, you know, lots of product space in. I'm not
more than
not advertising, but you know, like, definitely that scenario. Like,
I can't
Yeah,
put buy Sneak. I mean, more of the
you know that's where we're at with the firewall and our release integrity, malicious detection, and all that stuff. So, you know, this is a soapbox I get on frequently. So
right. So it's more raising awareness that it's not just the vulnerable software, it's literally the malicious software that's coming in. And there's a difference between malicious and vulnerable. And I think making sure that people are aware of that.
I have a diagram that I used when we were standing up our strategy at Shopify, where I basically showed, you know, like 3 boxes, and there's production, and then there's like software that is accidentally vulnerable and software that's deliberately vulnerable. And I said, all of our systems are currently tuned to the accidentally vulnerable. But the deliberately vulnerable is something we need to think about. So yes, I think that's a useful distinction. That's what's sort of led to all the work that we've been doing, focused in the Ruby ecosystem, obviously, because that's our bread and butter. Yeah, I think I want to sort of like grasp at what, or try to understand where you're driving at, Jonathan. Like, is it that you're thinking about the problem of raising awareness that this can happen and that you need to prepare for it, or is it around specific countermeasures? I know that lots of vendors, as we know from this call, are moving into what you might call package intelligence, as a service.
It's definitely, well, it's both, obviously, but I think raising awareness to start with, because when I talk to other end users, whether I talk to, even it's within it's the OSSF or different conferences, people just don't seem to be that aware of that as a problem. People are more looking at hardening a CI or asking people for SBOMs or looking at vulnerabilities in software. They're not looking at the malicious software that you and I are looking at, Shaq, and perhaps people in the school are looking at. It really isn't on, it's surprisingly not, it doesn't seem to be on as many people's radar as they thought it would be. And I'm seeing, you know, with some of the reports, I mean, from the Sonatype report, you can see the increase in the amount of malicious software. But I'm just concerned that it's not being discussed. For some reason, I get the view it's not being discussed as widely as it should be.
So yeah, that's interesting, because I'm sorry, I'll just quickly finish. It's interesting. I think, yes, I obviously have a biased view, and I hadn't thought of it that perspective. You know, everyone in my universe knows about it, but I'm not universe. That's why we have an end users group, right?
So, John, on that note, right, I mean, that's the part of awareness, and then the other part would be kind of like towards a procurement process, right? And how that actually is consistently implemented across the company, right? Because at the end of the day, some people would just bypass it. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But and I think, Jacques, to your point, I know a lot of us know about that, and a lot of people I talk to in supply chain know that's the case. But when I talk to people externally that haven't looked at supply chain yet, they really don't see, again, I might be in a different bubble, but they don't seem to notice it. Yeah. Krob, I think you were next.
Yeah, so I have 4 points, and I'll start with the one Daniel just echoed. First and foremost, we have a platform through the OpenSSF blog that if we wanted to put something together, we have a great panel of experts here that had a lot of insight, both from the end user and the commercial tooling space. We potentially could put together a really nice kind of kickstart blog talking about the topic. Point 2, which relates to one of the items I put on the agenda. There is the OpenSSF North America conference call for papers that's open. Another opportunity to raise awareness and get out and engage with the developer and consumer community would be going to conferences. So we might want to think about putting together a panel or education sessions for that conference. It'll be in Vancouver, British Columbia in May. And I expect we'll get the Europe and Japan or APAC dates probably in sometime in the spring. So if we do something for North America, we could essentially reuse that around the globe potentially. A tactic I've used in other working groups is this feels like something that would make a very useful best practices guide. So maybe we also, in concert with the blog and these other activities, we put together a guide as a work product of this group. So maybe an initiative that this working group might want to adopt. And then lastly, once we have some actual guidance, the education SIG is working on putting together a plan to kind of address developer and cybersecurity concerns. So this very definitely could be a module, or maybe it gets baked into part of the formal training. Maybe it becomes a podcast or a webinar that the education SIG helps put out. So I think you have a lot of outputs, a lot of channels that you can get this information out once we start to put it together.
Fantastic. I think they're great points, and I think we should use a lot of them for this output. Let's define it and get it out there. A manifesto, a best practice guide, get it out to all these different get it out to all these different places. It's really just my driving force is raise the awareness, and I think you just provided the how probe. So thanks for that. Pierre Giorgio, I think you're next up.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted just to share a bit of reflection on this topic of the malware detection, malware packages. I think at least from scientific point of view, there started being a bit of interest on this topic, and people started proposing very cool and interesting works on this and proposal about approaches. And I was wondering about the capabilities that we have so far of what we have as malicious samples, because it could be just an impression, but I tend to see often malware samples or malicious packages that have somehow the same shape, somehow low effort attacks with just basic obfuscation. We use mostly as reference backstabber's knife, and thankfully there exists there, and we use it kind of as a Bible. But I also believe that is not the full picture that we have, meaning that I probably there are more sophisticated attacks, and I don't know how to much extent we are really capable to detect that. And so I think it's a pity to lose a bit of the big picture on that and start reasoning on the possible evasion techniques that attackers can exploit to evade the possible and the current approaches that have been proposed, or the current proposed solution. Just that.
Brian, you had your hand up.
On that last point, I think you're right. And for that reason, when we built a model at Sonatype to detect these things, we took the approach not of trying to recognize the existing known malware, because it's constantly changing, but to try to build a model that could predict what is normal for projects. And we took a page from credit card fraud detection in that, where you can't always know where somebody's going to shop, but you can tell it's not normal for Brian to be on a different continent and buy a bunch of TVs. Like normal would be going to hotels, those kinds of things. And so we've pretty successfully built the model understanding what's normal and then flagging the things that are abnormal. That's how we've chosen to do it. And the best use case that happened, we were launching this live. I didn't know how well it was going to work. We launched it at the same time that I forget his name, the guy that was doing the dependency confusion research, the white hat stuff in the summer. He announced it like in February, March, something like that. The summer preceding that, he was doing the work, and our system was flagging every single one of his white hat attacks before the world knew that was a new type of attack. which was pretty awesome. So that's the approach that we've taken to do that. It's unfortunately not easy and requires massive amounts of data set to train the model on to be able to do. So I just figured I'd throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan.
Just a question on this point, because I mean, it's also true that we also see, I think, two types of malicious packages: the one that only contains the malicious code, and other one that, let's say, are a pure clone of an existing project and have just a one-liner inside. And so to what extent, for example, then trying to track what is normal will detect, just this needle in the haystack inside a big amount of code?
Well, we're looking at lots of different things. The thing that happened to be interesting around the dependency confusion, because that required higher than normal version numbers, the system was ultimately recognizing, again, before we knew a heuristic made sense here, projects don't start out publishing things with super high version numbers as their first release. That turns out that's an abnormal behavior. But now in 2023, it's easy to write a heuristic for that because we recognize it. Why I think it's interesting is because the MLAI told us this was interesting, almost 6 months, 9 months before that guy published his research. So those are the kinds of things. It's other stuff like drive-by committers or popular projects pretty infrequently are the first ones to use a very unpopular dependency. Turns out things like that tend to be hallmarks of somebody that buried their malware in a dependency and then somehow slipped it into a tree somewhere else, like that PyTorch thing, right? It's exactly those kinds of things. And so the problem is there's so many different ways that this cat and mouse game will play out. It's hard to know what the new thing they're going to do, but normal mature projects tend to have similar behaviors when they release. And so if you use that as the baseline, then these things pop out. But to your point that many of these projects are just like one-liners with the payload, I use that as evidence of why what Jonathan is talking about needs to happen, that the attacks are low sophistication because we're so terrible at blocking them as an industry, right? So why would they put extra effort to hide themselves when they don't care? They literally just want a typo squat, get it downloaded and run their backdoor. When I talk about this with prospects, I remind them that, like, hey, if you've built an application security portfolio around scanning things before you put it into production or you release it, you missed that this happened. And I like to relate it back to the 90s when browsers were inherently vulnerable, because back then you'd go to a website, you get hacked, nobody paid attention, and they just go, whoops, that's not the site I meant, and they'd go to the right one. And in these instances, that's exactly what's happening. The developers get the wrong thing, their build blows up, they figure out, oh, it's an underscore, not a dash, and they move on. And then the supply chain tools that weren't looking at what was happening in ingestion never see that this fact happened, because that bad component never got checked in the source control, never ran through CI. So they're completely blind to it. That's what we need to socialize, and that's what we need people to pay attention to.
Yeah, look, I this is great, because I think there's the two parts, right? There's the one is let's raise awareness, and there's the two is figure out how to get even better at mitigating and identifying it. And, I think the landscape's we can see the landscape changing a lot, actually quite quickly, where people are moving to different attack paths and attack approaches. At the moment, for the majority, perhaps thankfully, it's fairly basic, low level attacks, but as people get more aware of them, they will change and move. So I think there's a two-pronged approach there. It sounds like there's a lot of interest in raising awareness on that. So that's definitely something I want to see as a group if we really push forwards on. So great. Sounds like we've got the right people involved in that one. Very good. So any other major deliverables? I mean, there's quite a few that we've got up front at the moment. Should we leave it there? There's a couple, just want to take out a couple of actions from that already, right? So one action is for me to set up the group looking at the repository of threats. I'll take that one. Two is I'm going to take on the raising awareness of the different malicious attacks. Were there any other actions that we pulled out of that? sort of immediate? Oh, architectures. We need another working session on architectures as well.
Just a note on malicious packages. The Pharos is got, what's the name of his company? Brian, do you remember the name of Pharos's company that he started to detect this sort of stuff?
Doesn't ring a bell, Jonathan.
All right, give me a half second and I'll pull up his Twitter profile because so he's got a company that he's started around this basic idea of like flagging this in, developer machines, that also flagging it as a check-in that like, hey, this is probably a typo squat, or hey, this package is doing this weird thing in their pre-install scripts or whatever. So yeah, there we go. He is socket security, socket.dev.
Yes.
Yes. All right, cool.
There are a handful of small startups that are just starting to tackle this problem. Yeah.
Cool. So definitely 2 prongs, right? One is the raising awareness, and 2 is how, and I think that's in the how section. Not aware of that one particularly. I'll dig into that. Thanks for that. Any other actions we had from that little session there? There's the architectures. We need a session on that. I'm looking at like the next week or 2 to start moving forward with this stuff.
I have one you haven't talked about yet.
Yep. Where's that?
As a contributor to this group and as a TAC member, looking at the end user's Git repo, I don't know what this group is about. So it might be awesome to start to complete this and get this in order so that members and prospective members can see what we're doing and potentially get collaborating on some of these awesome ideas.
Great call, Crow. We actually had a Mitch who was doing that for us. Mitch doesn't seem to be on the call right now. I will reach back out to him and see if he can.
It takes hundreds of hours to edit an MD file. I could see why it might be a little slow.
Yeah, you've got to melt the chocolate first. It's a very involved process.
I think this is in relation to Krob's question. What is the scope of the end users? I guess end users is a very large term. Is it end users of software, or is it end users of like the software when it gets shipped and delivered to like your, true end users that are like, normal people that don't know anything about software at all?
Yeah, I think we do have a charter that's on the top of the our Slack group with the missions and goals. And the missions and goals, I think, does speak to that from a scope perspective, Jonathan. But I think to try and recall what it's at, it's basically not the end user in terms of someone actually holding a phone that has software within it, but kind of at the sort of enterprise level, or someone creating something and selling something like a hospital maybe, or a company building things. It doesn't necessarily need to be a software company. In fact, that's one of the architectures we're trying to do. So I think it's a valid point. Let's make sure that we have that in the GitHub data, and maybe pull stuff out of the mission and goals document. Got it. Thanks, Crow. First thing that the TAC asks about next Tuesday. Yep. Is it Tuesday? Or is it the 10th? Tuesday, right? So let me get in touch with Mitch, and if that's not forthcoming, I think we need to do that before Tuesday by the sound of it. Call out. Okay, now down to any other notes from working groups. This was the standing entry we have that we go through each time. Now, the reality is I think most people are going to have been away over the Christmas vacation. But is there any, I think from the notes that looks like it was copied from the previous one, but any additional notes from any user groups since we last met?
I added a couple things in addition to the call for papers, which I strongly encourage this group to put some things together for. The vulnerability disclosures working group is working on a CVD guide for OSS consumers. We've mentioned it here before, but I'll be setting up a doodle to try to find a time to collaborate. So if anyone's interested, I will also tag this working group's mailing list when I get the doodle set up. So please feel free to contribute to that. The Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group also put forth a open source security incident response team plan. It is now sitting with the TAC for review. This is creating a dedicated group of upstream security people that help open source maintainers on coordinating vulnerabilities. So if this group has any requirements of how they think end users would like to benefit from such a team, you can get that information to me or put a comment on that issue. Best Practices Working Group is working on 2 best practices guides that may be of interest to end user consumers, a C and C++ compiler guide, and a source code management best practices guide. So if anyone's interested in either contributing or ingesting the output of those things, keep an eye on those issues. And then finally, the Diagrammers Society has created several pictures of how the foundation is laid out and all the different activities. Most recently, we've working with a mind map format, and there's actually the issue 1 actually has the attachment to the mind map file. So if anyone's curious, you can open that up and kind of see the breadth of activities that are currently going on throughout the foundation. We're going to be sharing that with the TAC and starting to help make some strategic choices for the foundation based off of some of this output. So that's a nice group to keep an eye on. Any questions on those topics?
And I think that's very cool, and we need to start joining them. That's one of my New Year's resolutions, actually set aside time to join.
It's
See
tough.
how that goes.
Especially with the international constituents we have participating. Like the Diagrammers group, we have some people. We ended up with a California friendly time. But I'm setting up calls with all my working groups to do APAC friendly times. And we're going to try to shove the actual standing calls to a more European friendly, just so we can kind of capture more contributions. But you'll see that across the foundation, folks trying to adjust. But it's challenging when you're a global organization.
Great work. Thanks, Crow. And Alan, you've got an entry in there as well? Or is that the one you referred to?
Yeah, I think I already touched on
the
cloud side of things. We don't really know or have a good global vision of what SBOM means for services or cloud defined broadly. If that's on anyone's radar, would love your thoughts and input. We have a few end users from the healthcare space, but having some folks from here would be helpful. And John, I'll follow up with you about getting some folks from FSISAC involved as well.
Great.
Have you reached out to any of the hyperscalers? Amazon, Google, Azure?
Yes, the challenge is, of course, those organizations are very complicated in how they approach US government level things. That's one. Two, we're trying to draw 3 distinctions. One is just software dependencies, right? Here's a component, it's in there. How do we think about that? And even that's hard because you've got infrastructure as code, you've got microservices, you've got dynamically generated code. So we want to start out by at least saying this part is easy, this part is tricky. 2, then we have a desire to have greater transparency in the full stack. And this, of course, is going to raise a lot of red flags for the people that are delivering all of the infrastructure. And by the way, if anyone has had to sit through the true hell that is FedRAMP, that's something that is slightly worked on as well. The last piece that may be of interest is the idea that, hey, if it's a service, I may worry not just about the component dependencies, but third-party services that my service is using, or that the contracted service. So, right, I use Crobe service in turn uses Brian's service. Can I get visibility about that? Because it might be sensitive data. I may worry about the political jurisdiction that Brian's in, right? There's a lot of things. To the best of my knowledge, there is no concrete way of a machine readable way of saying this is a service, or even this is an API that someone else controls. So that's going to be one of the bigger picture things that we're going to be trying to tackle. But I don't know of anyone who's got anything that looks remotely like a scalable solution today. So didn't mean to take up too much time, but those are the different moving pieces. I want to start with and that's the plan for this year, is to sort of start with a 5-pager saying, what does SBOM mean? This is the stuff that ports easily. This is the stuff that we need to sort of think through. But we don't know, we all agree that we don't know how to do this today.
Okay. Alan, just to double check, is that's the Wednesday meeting, 3 to 4 Eastern?
That is the Wednesday meeting, 3 to 4 Eastern. I'll paste a link to the Google Doc that has the notes from it. If anyone wants to learn more, please, I'll sbom@cisa.dhs.gov is the easiest. Make sure you're on my mailing lists. Oops, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that'll be a good one. Okay. Thanks, Alan. Crobe, you mentioned the CFP. I think that's a good one we should all take a look at. And next up is Dan. You had a supplier, not supplier.
Yeah, it's just something that came across my desk, so to speak, over the holidays, and I just thought it would be interesting to raise here. I've included 2 links. One is a link to a post which links to a blog post, which is from an open source maintainer who's talking about, I'm not a supplier, and how they don't really see themselves as a supplier. They don't really agree with that nomenclature, the whole framework of ideas that's around the idea of software supply chain, and by extension SBOMs. And like we built a kind of conceptual framework around the idea of software supply chain. SBOM is one example where we're using the terminology of economics and supply chain as a way to communicate how software dependencies work to people that may not be familiar with how open source software dependencies work. And it's great, and it really does, we've all latched onto it. It's really great. Here's a good example of somebody who just who completely is an open source maintainer and completely feels alienated by that and does not see themselves as a supplier. And by the way, they make a good argument. I'm not a supplier. I don't have a contract with anybody upstream who's using my thing. There's no contractual arrangement here. So and then that trigged a memory from earlier this year when Daniel Stenberg, who's somebody who is the maintainer of a very well-known package, the curl open source package, got hit by letters from procurement team of some Fortune 500 company that said, can you immediately tell me within the next 24 hours if your code has log4j in it and blah, blah, blah. This is all documented in the blog post that he wrote in January, which is great. So it's not just a theoretical issue. It's actually like a question of how enterprises deal with open source suppliers or open source dependencies. And it struck me that maybe it could be an outcome of this group or an output of this group, kind of guidance for procurement teams, like don't do that, or here's how to engage with the open source community, or with open source community developers, or here are the different types of open source projects, some of which do fit into a kind of more of a supplier mentality, and some of which do not fit into a supplier mentality. That I don't know. I don't have anything more sophisticated in my mind or well thought through in my mind other than what I've just said. Other than I'm probably going to write a blog post about this at some point. But I just kind of wanted to raise it here and get the bug in people's ear. I see some nodding from Grob and others, so maybe this is a good thing to think about.
Is the author kind of conflating or equating supplier to producer?
Well,
I think my character,
I'll leave that to you to take a look at the
Okay.
post and
It's-
see what you think. Yeah.
it's pretty short, but the takeaway, and I don't think it'll be new to anyone in the open source world, but it basically just says your software is given to you as is. Fuck off. And it's exactly the sort of thing that I, in my role of thinking about it from a public policy perspective, we need to read it and take it seriously, even if we disagree with it, right? Even if because what he doesn't do is say, well, what now? Because the status quo is unsustainable. And so are we just going to find alternatives? Are we going to create a new license that says no more as is? Right. But it's not his job to find the solution.
Yeah, or maybe we need to think about things as a spectrum, right? Because there are some, like I said, there are some open source projects that do fit into the more like, then there are also open source projects that are produced by organizations that have an SLA around them and where there is a contractual agreement. And then there's a whole risk assessment where you can say, okay, well, this particular open source project is not, I do not have a contractual agreement with them. However, they're so well used and they have such a strong track record, and that all these other factors are in place, so therefore it's a low risk. Or I mean, I don't know what it kind of goes beyond the security aspects a little bit, yes, but it just struck me as relevant to this group because so much of what we talk about is sitting on top of the supply chain metaphor.
Completely is. Thanks, Dan. Jacques, you got a point to add here?
Yeah, I think one thing that stirred up a lot of the mud in the water here was the introduction of mandatory MFA by NPM, PyPI, and RubyGems for top maintainers. There was a line of argument, which I'm not sympathetic to, that since the software is as is, then the package repositories can't impose these kinds of terms, that you are stealing their work somehow. I'm of the view that the package repository is providing a free service. Thank you very much. It's private property and they can do whatever they like with it or not do with it, whatever they like. And if you don't like it, you can host it on your own website under any rules you like. But I think it's that event that started people down the road of like, what are the obligations on package maintainers? In this case, the obligations are not imposed by end users, they're imposed by the package repositories acting as custodians of the interests of the end users, as well as the package maintainers. And that's the argument I made when we were doing it for RubyGems, which is that, yes, it imposes drag and inconvenience on the package maintainers. But for a package maintainer, a compromise is embarrassing and distressing. For end users, it is potentially catastrophic, and there are far more of them. So just on a very brutal, a brutalist concrete poured into place kind of utilitarian calculus, it just comes out for the users. I'm sorry, we have to do it. So I think that's where some of this came from. Like that's how it got to be in the air. That was the meteorite impact that got all the dust up. And it's going to get much bigger this year because of GitHub imposing 2FA on everybody. Yeah, yep. I'm ready. But I think a lot of people, it's going to be an interesting time. Like, I don't think people realize how massive a shift in the landscape that is going to be.
Yep. Very cool. Good conversation. Any other? Oh, Grob, you got
and I think this group could provide guidance on how consumers can manage the risk of it using third-party components. I am extremely sympathetic to the maintainer developer. That's most of my work in the OpenSSF is focused on providing services for those communities. But we can do things to provide education and support, and things like the great MFA distribution, where 2 years ago the foundation gave away multi-factor tokens to maintainers to help prevent some of these supply chain things. So this group can provide some tactics for consumers, but also some solutions that potentially the foundation might be able to implement to help protect against some of these things, or at least educate.
Sorry. I think the place where we can give the input there is the S2C2F, which should have been called Saba. I'm still grumpy about that. But that seems like a good place for that input.
Yeah. Excellent. All right. Drawing to a close a little bit. Any other business? Anything anyone else wants to raise before we close the call? No. Okay. So good discussion as always. Good to get back to the table. I think there's a lot of actions as always, and I think really, one of the things I was thinking about was this meeting isn't just let's report back on how we're getting things done. We're doing a lot of work within this meeting, and I think there's a lot of work and a lot of working standing meetings we're trying to do outside of it, because I think there's just so much work going on. We can't just concertina the whole thing into a 1 hour. So apologies if there's like actions coming out of this thing and it sounds all sort of formal, but the reality is we're doing more work, I think, as a group than 1 hour every 2 weeks, which I think is really beneficial. So great work, everyone. I'm looking forward to a pretty awesome 2023, and more work from the group. Thanks very much, everyone. Talk to everyone soon. Bye.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day. Thanks.
Bye.
Ciao.